Welcome to the Safe Village, a community for everyone who cares about student safety and well-being. My name is Sydney. I'm the CEO of Saasyan, and my guest today is Julie Inman Grant. Julie is Australia's eSafety Commissioner, which is the world's first government regulatory agency committed to keeping its citizens safe. Julie, welcome to the Safe Village.
Thank you. No problem. Easy job. Not been done anywhere else, but we're figuring it out as we go along.
Well, that's only part of the story. I've only mentioned your day job. You are also the chair of the Child Dignity Alliance's Technical Working Group. You're a board member of the We Protect Global Alliance. The World Economic Forum and Apolitical has designated you as one of the world's most influential people that's revolutionizing government. Julie, what's top of mind?
Right. Well, there's a lot happening, and you find when you work in the technology space, as you would know, or in regulating the technology space, you've always got a lot of balls in the air. And as you may know, we recently had new reform legislation passed. It's pretty sweeping, complex, nuanced, and very novel legislation. So we're in the process of hiring about 50 new people. Now that's quite a growth trajectory. When I came in as eSafety Commissioner in 2017, there were about 35 people. We'll be about 200 people strong at the end of the year. So making sure that that growth is managed and we're not missing anything is really important. And then just bringing the public along and bringing stakeholders along on how we plan to implement on new adult cyber abuse scheme. We've got a consultation out for a declaration around restricted access systems. Separate from the legislation, we've got another call for evidence around the age verification review. And that's really groundbreaking. There's movement around the globe. So getting all of these provisions in place, we have a whole set of new codes. There's something called the Basic Online Safety Expectations, which is the ministerial instrument that's being consulted on as well. So fitting all those pieces together, bringing the population along and making sure that we're continuing to reach all Australian citizens and help them have a safer, more positive experience online.
Well, congratulations on the progress you've had to date, and you are absolutely on an unbelievable trajectory. Like whichever way we turn, and I'm not sure whether it's just our focus, but I don't think it is. eSafety Commission seems to be there. It's almost like you're running a startup within government. You're so agile and making a lot of noise. So good for you. You've got quite an interesting background, having spent time in Congress in the US, do I understand that correctly? And a number of years with some of the large tech firms. So, and then a bunch of NGOs, but then lots of experience with bringing people on the journey. So maybe tell me a little bit more about that. What does this mean? We've got legislation where you're trying to corral people into agreeing a framework on age verification. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges and what you're working on with bringing people on the journey, because you are managing lots of stakeholders.
That's right. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned my early years back in Washington, D.C., actually about 30 years ago. And, I actually started working at the intersection of social justice, public policy, safety, and technology before there was an internet. I was working on social issues, and my congressman said to me, "Hey, we need someone to work on technology issues. We've got this small little company called Microsoft in our district, so can you help out?" And so that's where I started working at that intersection. And, it was really one of the first technology policy specialists to kind of spring up in Washington, D.C., So was there in the mid-1990s, helped put together the first White House summit on online safety when President Clinton was president, helped shape the Communications Decency Act for better or for worse. I think we're seeing a lot of debate in the U.S. Congress that, giving the platforms a free pass and essentially immunity from liability having repercussions now. So a long journey to get here, obviously being within the technology industry for more than 22 years, and sometimes serving as a safety antagonist and wanting to do things like, get Microsoft to focus on safety by design the same way they focused on security by design and privacy by design. So I brought that concept to them about 11 years ago. They were becoming an enterprise company at the time, so weren't interested. Combating technology facilitated abuse and targeted online harassment and online racism and online misogyny. I saw that day in and day out at Twitter, and ultimately felt really believe strongly in the role that social media played in terms of serving as a great leveler and giving people a voice who might not have had one, and speaking truth to power. We saw that play out powerfully through the Arab Spring. But once I started to see how that targeted online harassment was actually suppressing speech, and I felt that we weren't doing enough to make sure that our users were safe, I found it very hard to defend the company. So now I find myself in a very privileged position of serving in government in my adopted home of Australia, and being able to take all these lessons and try and make the online world a better place. And we're not going to do that just through regulation or arresting people out of these issues. And that's why the prevention side of things is so important, and what I call proactive change beyond the protection. And that's really anticipating the threat vectors for the future and minimizing that threat surface, but also shifting responsibility back to the technology companies themselves for embedding those virtual seatbelts, for assessing risk and putting those protections up front in rather than retrofitting after the harm's been done.
Fantastic. The safety antagonist. I love that. Have you registered that .com for that? That could be something very cool. So speaking of safety by design, maybe that's a good segue to talk about some of the principles there. Given, and I saw some of the work that your team members were doing and joined some of your live webinars there around safety by design. And given that we also at Saasyan and our Safe Village play at that intersection of technology and in our case, students and kids, very interesting to, and as we partner with the large technology firms in providing what we do, very interesting to see some of the principles that you're talking about. So what are some of the key tenets that you're asking the tech firms to think about as part of safety by design?
Yeah, first of all, I'd say congratulations for the work in progress that Saasyan has made. It's really exciting to see the birth of safety technology companies here in Australia, and businesses being built around online safety. When, as I said, as that antagonist, I wasn't able to get those larger platforms to really even consider how their platforms were being weaponized and causing personal harm to their users. So, our approach really was, this is not something we as government should be doing to industry. We need to do it with them, because there's really an element of cultural change that needs to happen here. So that whole mantra around moving fast and breaking things and profits at all costs still tends to drive a lot of what happens in the technology industry. And as you would know, as founders, you're trying to get that next series of funding, you're trying to get your technology out there, you're trying to get users. Probably the last thing you're thinking about is, how is my platform going to be misused, and how do I engineer out that misuse? It's just not in the DNA of a lot of founders. So we wanted to sit down with the major companies. It took us about 9 months, and the three major overarching principles are service provider responsibility. What should technology companies be doing to keep their users safe online? The second tenet is around user empowerment technology. So again, how are you making it easier for your users to access your various safety tools and get the help that they need? And then the final platform or pillar is really around transparency and accountability. We know that's in short supply right now. We're seeing a lot of selective transparency rather than radical transparency, and we certainly need companies to be more accountable about in terms of what happens on their platforms. But after we arrived there, and that was a big feat in and of itself, meaningful consultation is hard and it takes a long time. But the only way you're going to get agreement is if you are listening to all sides and reaching the right position. But we've seen a little bit of principles fatigue. Lots of principles out there, and principles-based frameworks are great, but unless they're being implemented in some way, they're just guideposts. So what we decided to do was take on phase 2, which was actually develop the free assessment tools so that we could surface up best practice. So we did that with about 180 different organizations we worked with to get that right. We're getting fantastic feedback from both startups and enterprise companies. This is really just helping them bring their leadership on a journey about how platforms are weaponized, what is an online harm, what are the spectrum of harms, what are some of the things that other companies have done to surface up, detect, and then remove these kinds of harms. How do you effectively develop and deploy a child sexual abuse system using photo DNA? So really, really important things. We're not done yet. We're trying to work with investors, often as the adults in the room, with due diligence clauses and checklists for their the VC subjects, if you will, or the early stage companies. But also we're running pilots in 4 different Australian universities to try and inculcate the whole ethical principles around safety by design in business, in law, for the next generation of coders and engineers. So they're mindfully thinking that the technologies they're building can be used for societal good, or they can undermine democratic principles and, be quite toxic, polarizing places, which is where sadly we find ourselves now.
Amazing. So absolutely, I can tell you the other side of the coin or the perspective, having spent 20 years plus as a tech founder, both in Australia, spent 5 years in Silicon Valley, been in through lots of, global speaking circuits and events. Not once has it come up that, it's always minimum viable product, fastest path to revenue, viral growth almost at any cost, and this sort of sales culture that's aggressive. And so you're right, it just never appears in the room. And then on the other hand, when we all get, from a company perspective, become older, we talk about corporate social responsibility as if it's something that you can just turn on overnight and it'll just happen. But by design, we were not set up for success. So it's so important, this message and this framework, and then the guides that you're helping distribute.
Well, what I love about your business is it's predicated on helping people. It's predicated on keeping kids safer, and so you can build that into your DNA. I think what's really challenging about this kind of cultural change problem, because really, if the leadership was there, if the will was there, the Silicon Valley companies are printing money over COVID. They've got intellectual capital. They've got access to the best technology tools. They have vast financial resources. If this were a priority tomorrow, we would have a very safe ecosystem. But it's really driving that change, and also making clear that this is not incompatible with innovation. In fact, I think we need to see more innovation in safety technologies to be able, because really it is a bit of an arms race, isn't it? You see this every day. There are going to constantly be different ways that people will weaponize different platforms. They'll be clever. They'll use VPNs. They'll create multiple imposter accounts to target a single child. And with anonymity and identity shielding fairly commonplace now, it is pretty easy to hide, in the dark recesses of the web.
Absolutely. We could talk forever around the technology and innovation space. I do want to switch gears now and bring it back to a little bit around the school community who we absolutely serve. And I know the eSafety Commission has a number of resources as well around design for schools, as well as services for when things go wrong. Can we talk a little bit about that, of what?
Sure.
When I found out, I was like, oh my God, why doesn't everyone know about this, right?
Yeah, that is a challenge being a small agency with no advertising budget. It's really, and that's why we're shaking trees and trying to use the media and outlets like this to try and get the word out. But gosh, educators are so pivotal in this process. Obviously, we know that parents are. So let me just start with them. You know, parents being the front line of defense, and our research showing that 42% of Australian children are online by the time they're 2, and by the time they're 4, they have access to a digital device 94% of the time. So teaching parents how to set parental controls, be engaged in their kids' online lives, start to set limitations early, and give those 4 messages of be safe, be kind, ask for help, and make good choices. So when we get into the school sector, I mean, it is challenging, as you'd know. We have a fragmented education system with this, federal, states, and territories, and the Catholics, the independents, and the public schools. So what we don't see now is consistent and comprehensive online safety education that's delivered to every Australian child in the same way, and at the same pace and in an age-appropriate way. So we start with teachers. We do pre-service teacher training. We do professional development training. And even over the past 5 years, it's been interesting to watch how some of the older generation teachers are clocking out, and we've got a new generation of more digital natives coming in. Different issues, different learning curves, but administrators and teachers are having to manage incidents, as you say, in the classroom and beyond on the playground. We know that 1 in 5 children are cyberbullied in Australia. The average age is 14, but it's getting younger, and girls are bullied more than boys. We also know it tends to be peer-to-peer. So when you see that cyberbullying happening amongst young people, it's often an extension of conflict that's happening within the school gates. So, we're also trying to get across to schools. Where do you draw the line? Well, if it's part of the school community, it's probably still your responsibility to a certain degree to help adjudicate the risks. And we do see lots of parents and teachers and principals doing that. And part of the service that we provide beyond taking down harmful cyberbullying content is in working with the school community, parents and students themselves, to try and address the issues that are happening within the school gates, so that all this other stuff just melts away. So we spent about 18 months working with education departments and schools across the country in about 2018 to develop a toolkit for schools. So that's everything on how do you manage an incident when it happens? What should your policies look like? All those types of things. Our best practice guide for education is based on international research, and we did that in conjunction with QUT, and a lot of that work is based on what David Finkelhor from the New Hampshire Crimes Against Children Center in the US has done in terms of what pedagogies work when you're teaching kids or even parents about online safety education. Fear-based messages don't work. Judgment doesn't work. Telling someone they're a bad parent because they let them go into the device with, bombarding them with information, giving them one-off presentations and thinking that's sufficient. Just being able to surface all that up for educators so that when they are delivering this training, they can do it in a way that is going to really enable that real behavioral change that we need to see, that's age and developmentally appropriate. And I guess the 4 R's that we see for the digital age in the schools are respect, responsibility, building digital resilience, and honing those critical reasoning skills.
Wow, there's a lot of great content and work there. I really encourage everyone watching this episode to absolutely not only share this episode, but we'll add the resource notes to the show notes, your links, and please make sure and it's free, it's there, it's used world-class thinking in creating in some universities, and world great thought leaders have come to put this together. So make sure you go and take advantage of these free resources that are available. Julie, my last question is, it's a difficult job that you've got, and absolutely I love and respect what you're doing because it's mission-led. What is it that you wish people knew that they don't? That, through this little channel here, if we could help get the message out to make your job and your team's job a little bit more easier, what is it about your job and your mission that you wish people knew that they just don't quite know?
Well, I think the first thing is that we all have a responsibility to keep ourselves and our kids safer online. And just to go to eSafety.gov.au, think of that as that one-stop shop where you've got the prevention, education, and program material where you can report abuse. I would just encourage adults in particular to go visit. We know 95% of parents see online safety as that preeminent parenting challenge, but only about 10% will actually go seek out the information until something goes wrong. So it's not a matter of if something might go wrong online with your kids, it's when. So I would just encourage parents to be proactive, start having the conversation, start the chat with your kid about what they're doing online. And if you set those limitations early and you create open conversations, your child's more likely to come to you if something does go wrong online. You want to keep those lines of communication open.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, Julie. We wish you and the team all the best in your future endeavors and your growth and the impact that you're making, both in Australia, but I feel like you're going to make a global impact. I already know there's a number of global government bodies already talking to you and getting your counsel on what you've already achieved here. So thanks for being on the Safe Village, and we wish you all the best.
Same to you, and thank you so much for the opportunity.